Before you judge, before you scroll away, hit subscribe right now because what you're about to hear is not just a story. It's a truth wrapped in fiction that America keeps trying to outrun. A moment that begins with a child holding a gun and ends with a nation forced to look in the mirror. Subscribe, stay with me, and listen until the last breath of the story, because missing even one sentence means missing the reason everything changes. The night smelled like burned rubber and wet concrete when 11-year-old Aaliyah Carter stood barefoot in the middle of Jefferson Avenue. Her small hands shaking as she aimed her father's old revolver at 3 police officers whose red and blue lights washed the street in violent color. Her braids sticking to her tear-soaked cheeks, her voice cracking yet somehow louder than the sirens as she screamed the words that would later fracture the country in half. Why did you kill my daddy? Because only 40 minutes earlier, Marcus Carter, a warehouse supervisor, church volunteer, and the kind of man neighbors trusted with spare keys, had been shot twice in the chest during what police would later call a routine traffic stop. And as Aaliyah stood there, knees trembling, every adult on that street froze in disbelief, because children were not supposed to look like this, sound like this, or carry the weight of death with such raw clarity. And the officers, Davis, Klein, and Romero, exchanged glances that flickered between fear and protocol, fingers hovering near triggers, training battling instinct, because the manuals never prepared them for a child whose grief had sharpened into something dangerous, and somewhere behind the yellow tape Aaliyah's mother had collapsed screaming. Neighbors filming with phones that would soon ignite social media, and the air itself felt like it was holding its breath, but what no one on that street knew yet, what would not be revealed until much later, was that this moment was not an accident of chaos but the final spark in a chain of events that had begun years earlier in a desert halfway across the world. When 13 men wearing no insignia and answering to no public authority made a promise to one another that if the truth ever needed teeth, they would be those teeth, and as Officer Davis took a step forward, palms raised, voice softening into the practiced tone used for hostage situations, Aaliyah tightened her grip and screamed again, her words cutting deeper than the cold night, because she had seen the body cam footage already, had watched her father reach slowly for his wallet, had heard him say, "I'm not resisting," had watched him die on a cracked sidewalk while an officer shouted commands that contradicted each other, and the city's attempt to bury the footage had failed when a leak hit the internet, and now Jefferson Avenue was no longer just a street, it was a stage, and America was watching in real time as a child pointed a gun at the law, and then the unthinkable happened, because just as Officer Klein whispered that they might have to take the shot, the lights went out. Not the sirens, not the cameras, but the streetlights themselves, plunging the block into a darkness so sudden it felt unnatural. And from that darkness came movement, precise and silent, shapes flowing into position with military discipline, and before anyone could react, 13 men appeared, surrounding the officers. In a perfect ring, rifles raised but fingers off triggers, their faces calm, unreadable, and their presence so overwhelming that even the sirens seemed to shrink back, and someone on a live stream whispered the words that would trend within minutes. Navy SEALs. But these men wore no patches, no flags, only matte black gear and expressions carved from something harder than stone, and the tallest among them stepped forward, removing his helmet to reveal salt and pepper hair and eyes that looked like they had seen every bad ending the world could offer, and he spoke quietly, almost gently, telling Aaliyah to lower the gun, telling the officers to step back, telling everyone that nobody else needed to die tonight. And the officers complied not because of fear alone but because something in that man's voice carried authority older than the law itself. And as Aaliyah collapsed into sobs, the gun slipping from her fingers, one of the men caught it midair while another wrapped her in a blanket, and the crowd erupted into chaos. Shouting, crying, chanting. But the 13 men remained still, and within hours the city would claim it had no idea who they were. The Pentagon would issue a denial, and cable news would spin theories ranging from mercenaries to foreign interference. But the truth was both simpler and more dangerous, because these men were ghosts, former operators who had officially died in training accidents, classified missions, or administrative disappearances, men who had watched the ideals they fought for rot from the inside, men who had buried friends while politicians buried reports, and Marcus Carter had been one of theirs once. Not a SEAL, not a soldier, but a translator who had saved lives overseas, including the life of the man now standing on Jefferson Avenue. And when Marcus returned home, broken in ways he never spoke about, he believed the country he served would protect his family. But he was wrong, And the man leading the 13 had made a promise at Marcus's funeral that if the system ever failed his blood, he would not. And so the night after the shooting, after the footage leaked, after Aaliyah ran from her mother's arms with the revolver she barely knew how to hold, a switch flipped, a call was made, and 13 men who had vanished from the world stepped back into it, not to start a war, but to force a reckoning. And the twist that would later shock even their supporters was that they never intended to harm the officers, because their real target was not 3 men on a street but a structure built on silence. And over the next 72 hours, as Aaliyah slept under guard in a safe house she didn't know was protected by the same men, files began to surface, internal memos, altered reports, patterns of misconduct tied together by data only someone with military intelligence training would know how to assemble. And the officers involved in Marcus Carter's death were quietly pulled from duty not for public safety but because someone higher up realized the dam was cracking, and protests erupted nationwide. But unlike past cycles of outrage, this time something felt different, because every attempt to control the narrative failed. Every press conference was undermined by another leak, another angle, another name, and the biggest twist came when the leader of the 13 turned himself in on live television, sitting calmly across from a stunned anchor, revealing his identity, his connection to Marcus, and his reason for stepping into the open. Not to escape justice, he said, but to redefine it. And as legal experts scrambled, as politicians demanded answers, and as millions watched, he released the final file, a ledger proving that Marcus Carter's traffic stop was not random but the result of a flawed predictive policing algorithm disproportionately flagging black drivers. An algorithm approved, funded, and defended despite warnings. And suddenly the question, "Why did you kill my daddy?" was no longer just a child's cry. It was an indictment of policy, profit, and prejudice, and the officers, once portrayed as villains or victims depending on the channel, became something more unsettling. Cogs in a machine designed to fail certain people more than others. And when the trials finally came, they were unlike anything America had seen, because evidence could not be buried, because juries had seen the footage, because a nation had watched a child stand her ground and live. And the final twist, the one no headline could fully capture, came years later when Aaliyah Carter, no longer a child, stood at a podium as a civil rights attorney, beginning her speech not with anger but with memory, telling the story of a night when she learned fear could be louder than sirens and truth could summon ghosts. And somewhere in the back of the room, unseen and unnamed, 13 men listened, knowing they had not saved the world, only bought it a moment to choose differently. And as Aaliyah ended her speech, she repeated the words that started it all, not as an accusation this time, but as a challenge to the future. "Why did you kill my daddy?" And the silence that followed was no longer empty because America was finally answering.